New Hampshire Democrats have fought their own party, trying to keep the primary as we know it intact. The Democratic National Committee voting to change the rules and the calendar, threatening candidates who visit New Hampshire to campaign. But keeping New Hampshire first is one of the only things that both state parties can agree on, and they're not just focused on 2024, but well beyond.
New Hampshire is going to be first in the nation, and that there's no question about that. And any report that South Carolina will be going prior to the New Hampshire primary is simply false.
Are you working with the DNC behind the scenes? Any lobbying efforts to try to get them to change their minds for 2024?
Well, we did that for many months, and we're given all sorts of assurances, and then that decision came out. So right now we've just turned our focus towards the general election of 24.
You said that they could reconsider, that there's still some time before the primary. How likely do you think that will be?
Well, you know, I'm a New Hampshire Democrat, so I'm an optimist. I always believe that something good is going to happen, and so I hope very much that the White House reconsiders, that the president does file in New Hampshire, and that he wins heartily. The fact is we're going to be first, and if he chooses not to participate in it, that just gives an opportunity for multiple others to make a name for themselves.
Do you think it's possible that some major candidates could decide not to run in New Hampshire because of these potential sanctions?
Well, I think that conversation will be more apt for the 2028 cycle. And I think that, as was announced, we're going to revisit the calendar. The DNC is going to revisit the calendar. And I feel very confident that New Hampshire will retain its first-in-the-nation status in 2028.
We are working with the Democratic Party in the state. We are together on this issue, and you know, it may be one of the few issues that we do see eye to eye on. It's unfortunate that the national Democrats, the DNC, and President Biden have abandoned New Hampshire. The Republican Party is united in supporting New Hampshire being first primary. There's no question about that. And so we're trying to continue to put pressure on the president and the DNC to reconsider what they've done. And it's a 100-year tradition. We do it well, we do it correctly, and the results we think are for the betterment of the country. So it's a service to the country, the retail politicking, the small market. You don't need a ton of money to get started, and we can vet candidates in a retail fashion.
How are you putting pressure on the Democratic Party to keep New Hampshire first?
Yeah. So we remind them whenever we can that President Biden came in 5th here, and instead of reaching out to the voters to find out why they didn't resonate with him in our primary 4 years ago and work it, they changed the rules. And they say, I can't win here, so I'm going to change the rules. So we're putting pressure on them to basically shame them and say, every time you can't win, why do you try to change the rules?
There is so much at play in any New Hampshire primary, but in this cycle, we have variables we've never seen before, like the potential candidacy of Governor Chris Sununu. There's also a former president running to get his job back, something that hasn't happened in a very long time. And then you've got the DNC's efforts to relegate and potentially end the first-in-the-nation primary as we know it. If this was weather forecasting, it's like 2 or 3 entirely new mountain ranges suddenly popped up in New Hampshire, scrambling everything we know about how things usually work. Let's focus on that Republican primary first. Some have referred to Governor Chris Sununu as a favorite son kind of candidate if he runs. But how's it going to work if he tries to operate in his own state as a top-tier presidential candidate? Sununu has succeeded in part because of his innate grasp of the rhythms and nature of life in New Hampshire, which tends to be modest and small scale. If he runs, he's going to need to figure out how to scale up that approach and still find success. But let's envision a scenario in which Sununu does get in and skyrockets to the top of the polls, at least here in New Hampshire. This would, of course, be a positive development for him. But if it looks like Sununu is in a position to close out the competition here, other candidates could make the completely rational decision to just pull out of New Hampshire altogether and dedicate valuable campaign resources elsewhere. It should be noted that right now, the polling indicates Sununu is nowhere near poised to play the spoiler in this primary. Okay, let's talk about the biggest name in the mix, former President Donald Trump. He's generally the polling favorite right now, and that's not always the best place to be 10 months out from the primary, but this isn't just any frontrunner. This is the former President of the United States, a man who completely upended GOP politics. In 2016, he went wire to wire, leading from the summer of 2015 to the nomination. This time around, there is a criminal indictment. The legal jeopardy is out there and it's real. That's a factor to consider with a lot of implications. But this threat is something Trump has dealt with for decades. It's not difficult to envision a scenario in which Trump goes wire to wire in this primary and wins again. However, here's where Governor Chris Sununu could come back into the picture if he doesn't run. Sununu has said repeatedly he thinks Trump represents the past and Republicans need someone new to lead for the future. So maybe what he could try to do here is what no one could do in 2015 and 16. Stand aside, but consolidate support behind a non-Trump candidate. Right now, the one potential candidate who has risen, not quite to Trump level, but somewhere in between Trump and the rest of the potential field, is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. He's not in the race yet, but Republicans and conservative-leaning independents are interested. There is a buzz. In fact, if there's a primary candidate comparison for DeSantis, it's this individual, Barack Obama. Both very smart Ivy Leaguers with law degrees, both characterized by critics as being a bit too aloof. But even if you accept that criticism, they are clearly able to connect with their base voters anyway. And most importantly, when it comes to primary politics, both were, by their party standards, on the right side of key issues, giving them a spark and a level of excitement that's difficult to generate in any other way. So maybe DeSantis gets in. Maybe his candidacy gains some momentum among Republicans who want to turn the page. We're already seeing him mix it up a little bit with Trump, staying on his political brand as a fighter. But few, if any, Republicans have adopted that strategy and lived politically to tell the tale. Okay, the Democratic side of this primary is radically different. As we've already noted, the DNC has removed New Hampshire from the top spot in its primary calendar, and it has set up the conditions and punitive measures to come down on the Granite State tradition like a ton of bricks. Again, the DNC can't stop New Hampshire from holding its primary, and it can't stop this state from going first, but it can punish Democratic candidates who campaign here by barring them from sanctioned debates. It can refuse to recognize the results of the primary, and it can deny the state party seats at its national convention. There are two distinct scenarios in the Democratic primary if President Joe Biden does decide to run for re-election, as many expect. Either he's going to be on the ballot here or he's not. If he's going to follow the DNC rules he proposed, he'll just ignore New Hampshire altogether. But it's possible Biden could throw a curveball and decide to put his name on the ballot anyway. Even if he doesn't do that, Democrats can still write him in. At the moment, there is one progressive challenger to Biden, spiritual author and bestseller Marianne Williamson. She got a nod from Bernie Sanders when she got in and launched her campaign. He said he expected her to raise important issues in her candidacy. Others could join the contest, but even with the DNC drama, this primary could have a similar feel to other intra-party challenges to sitting presidents we've seen in the past. Like in 1992, when conservative firebrand Pat Buchanan took on sitting President George H.W. Bush. President Bush didn't really engage with Buchanan in New Hampshire, and Biden could do the exact same thing here with Williamson. If she's the only challenger, Biden may just ignore all of this, let her have New Hampshire to herself, and count on write-in votes to carry him to primary victory early next year.
As Adam just described, a number of factors could affect which direction voters go in and could affect turnout. But if history is any indication, New Hampshire's turnout will be stellar. One of the reasons Dartmouth Professor Emerita Linda Fowler says the Granite State leading the way has been so instrumental to the process for decades.
You know the famous joke, well, what do you think of candidate X? I don't know. I've only met him 5 times. But it's true. And I actually did, with some colleagues here, did research on the 1996 primary and the 2000 primary. And what we found was that this retail politics phenomenon was real. And the way it worked was that people were interested in a candidate. They went to see the candidate. And after they had seen the candidate, they were more likely, their favorable impression had strengthened. Typically. We also saw another phenomenon, though, which was that people were switching all over the place, and the polls were really not picking that up. What they were picking up were the aggregate totals in the state, and what they were missing was that people were switching from the Democrat to the Republican. They were switching from one Republican to another, and people were really shopping instead of just going with name recognition. If you're just starting out at the primary season, you really need to hone your message, and you really need to learn what works on the campaign trail. candidates are not born knowing that, and they don't start something as major as a presidential race knowing how to do that. For most people, it's a daunting experience, and to do it in Iowa and in New Hampshire, it can be helpful to sort of try things out and see what people feel is real. There's something special about going first, and it has had a really marked impact on the political culture in this state. All you have to do is look at the turnout for presidential primaries. So South Carolina was the winner at our expense, but the turnout in South Carolina primaries has been negligible, probably a third, maybe a fourth of what it is in New Hampshire. And my concern is that the kind of political attentiveness and the sense of engagement that the primary provided in this state will erode. But I think the nation loses as well. Our politics is so polarized, and I think it's good to have primaries in states that allow independents to participate, because it does have a moderating, or it can have a moderating effect on the polarization that goes on here.
There is a lot to keep track of as campaign season heats up, but we also have a lot of ways to help you keep pace. Stay with us.